Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. Edison, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. I remember how the house felt too big that evening, despite how cramped it usually was. You'd think having two brothers around would make me feel safer, but it was just us against this uneasy atmosphere seeping into every corner. The year was 2021, late October, and the desert air carried an unusual chill that seemed to penetrate the old mudstone walls of our family's ranch house. Normally, we'd all be at the annual harvest dinner with the rest of the family, listening to Uncle Miguel's stories, while Aunt Rosa complained about the dust getting into everything. The sound of cousins laughing, plates clattering, and the old generator humming would fill the night. Instead, we got stuck tending sheep because someone had to stay behind, and the place felt hollow without our parents' voices echoing through the rooms. The house itself was ancient, built by my great-grandfather with his own hands, back when this part of New Mexico was even more isolated than it is now. Adobe walls 3 feet thick, small windows designed to keep out the desert heat, and creaking wooden floors that announced every footstep. On normal nights, those sounds were comforting, familiar. Tonight, they seemed to amplify our isolation. It started with the dogs outside. We had 5 of them. Working dogs, all mutts with sharp instincts honed by generations of ranch life. They barked in this erratic pattern, starting with Bruno, our oldest shepherd mix, then rippling through the pack in waves. It wasn't their usual alert bark when coyotes prowled the perimeter. This was different, urgent, almost desperate, like they couldn't decide if they should attack or flee. My older brother, Miguel Jr., 22, and built like our father with broad shoulders from years of ranch work, said it was probably just coyotes getting bold. They know the trucks are gone, he reasoned, peering through the kitchen window. Probably think they can test their luck with the sheep. My younger brother Carlos, barely 15 but already taller than me, half agreed. He stood by the door, one hand on the deadbolt, staring at it for far too long. Yeah, maybe, he muttered, but I caught the way his fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Me? I acted like nothing was wrong, busying myself with cleaning up our simple dinner of beans and tortillas. But I was lying to myself. At 19, I'd lived on this ranch long enough to know every sound, every rhythm of the night. This wasn't right. The dog's barking had a quality I'd never heard before, raw fear mixed with territorial rage. After dinner, we tried to settle down for the night. The idea was to keep things normal, maintain our routine. We checked the sheep through the window, all 43 accounted for in their pen, huddled together near the lean-to shelter. The sight should have been reassuring, but the way they pressed against each other, heads low, ears flicking constantly, sent unease crawling up my spine. Miguel Jr. bolted the door with the heavy wooden beam our father had carved himself. The sound of it sliding into place usually meant safety, but tonight it felt more like we were locking ourselves in rather than keeping something out. The dogs wouldn't let up. They'd fall silent for 30 seconds, maybe a minute, then explode into frenzied barking again. It wasn't coming from one direction either. Sometimes from the front of the house, sometimes the back, occasionally from the sides. Like whatever had them agitated was circling, probing. Testing. I found myself pacing the length of the house, from the old cast-iron stove that had warmed 3 generations to the window overlooking the sheep pen. 20 steps one way, 20 steps back. The floorboards groaned under my weight, adding their voice to the symphony of unease. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Carlos teased from his spot on the couch, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his own anxiety. He had our grandfather's old rifle across his lap, unloaded, because our parents kept the ammunition locked up. But its presence seemed to comfort him. Miguel Jr. pretended to read a week-old newspaper by lamplight, but I noticed he'd been on the same page for 20 minutes. Every time the dogs erupted, his eyes would flick to the windows, scanning the darkness beyond. Around 10 o'clock, the temperature dropped further. Our breath started misting in the air, which was unusual even for a desert night. I added more wood to the stove, but the heat seemed to dissipate before it could warm the room. The shadows in the corners grew deeper, more substantial, like they were absorbing the light rather than simply existing in its absence. That's when we heard the first scream. It wasn't human, I need to be clear about that. It came from one of the dogs, probably Estrella, our youngest. A sound of pure animal terror that cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Miguel Jr. shot to his feet, newspaper falling forgotten to the floor. Carlos's knuckles went white around the rifle stock. We waited, hearts hammering, for something, anything, to break that terrible quiet. When the barking resumed, it was different. Fewer voices now, and they sounded farther away, like the pack had retreated from whatever they'd encountered. "We should check on them," I said, though every instinct screamed against going outside. "No!" Miguel Jr.'s voice was firm, taking on the authoritative tone he used when our parents left him in charge. "Whatever's out there, we're not going to face it in the dark. The dogs know how to take care of themselves." But I could see the doubt in his eyes. These weren't just animals to us. They were partners, protectors, family. Leaving them to face danger alone went against everything we'd been taught about ranch life. Eventually, exhaustion began to overtake fear. Carlos dozed fitfully on the couch, rifle sliding to the floor with a clatter that made us all jump. Miguel Jr. moved to the rocking chair by the stove, fighting to keep his eyes open. I tried lying down on the rug, using my rolled-up jacket as a pillow, but sleep felt impossible with adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The silence stretched on. No more barking, no wind. Even the usual chorus of crickets and nightbirds had gone quiet. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, that made you strain to hear something, anything, to confirm you hadn't gone deaf. Then around midnight, nature called. Of course it did. My bladder didn't care about the terror lurking outside. I lay there for another 10 minutes, hoping the urge would pass, but it only grew more insistent. "Miguel," I whispered, nudging my brother awake. "I need to use the outhouse." He cracked one eye open, giving me a look that managed to convey annoyance, amusement, and understanding all at once. "Seriously, now? Unless you want me to pee in Mama's good part." That got him moving. He grabbed the flashlight from its hook by the door, checked that the batteries were working, then looked at me seriously. "We go together. No wandering off, no investigating strange noises. Straight there and back." I nodded, throat too dry to speak. Miguel Jr. lifted the bar from the door, the wood scraping against the brackets, sounding impossibly loud in the quiet house. The door creaked open, revealing a wall of darkness that seemed to press against the threshold. Stepping outside was like entering another world. The moon was 3/4 full, casting everything in sharp silver and black. Our breath clouded in the frigid air, and frost glittered on the sparse grass. The familiar yard looked alien, transformed into a landscape of harsh shadows and uncertain shapes. The sheep were silent, pressed against the far side of their pen. I could see the gleam of their eyes, reflecting our flashlight beam, all turned in the same direction, toward the cluster of juniper trees beyond the tool shed. Not a single dog was visible, though I spotted dark shapes that might have been paw prints in the dust. We moved quickly, gravel crunching under our boots. The outhouse stood 20 yards from the main house, a simple wooden structure that great-grandfather had built far enough away to keep odors at bay, but close enough for winter nights. Miguel Jr. played the flashlight beam in sweeping arcs, checking behind the water barrel, the truck, anywhere something could hide. "Make it quick," he muttered, taking up position outside the outhouse door like a sentry. I ducked inside, trying to ignore how vulnerable I felt in that tiny wooden box. Through the gaps in the planks, I could see slices of the night. Moonlit ground, the corner of the house, my brother's boots. The usual outhouse sound seemed amplified, embarrassingly loud in the silence. That's when I heard Miguel Jr. curse, low, sharp, afraid. I burst out of the outhouse to find my brother frozen. Flashlight beam fixed on something near our father's truck. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but wrong somehow. Too tall, limbs too long, moving with a strange, disjointed gait that made my stomach turn. As it stepped into better light, details became clearer, and I wished they hadn't. The figure wore what might have been clothes once, tattered remnants that hung off its emaciated frame. Its skin was pale, not healthy pale, but the color of something that had been underground too long. Dark veins traced patterns across its visible flesh like a road map of corruption. But it was the face that made my legs turn to water. Human features stretched and distorted, mouth too wide, eyes sunken so deep they looked like holes punched in white paper. Those eyes reflected our flashlight beam with a reddish glint. Like an animal's, but somehow worse because they held intelligence. Malevolent, calculating intelligence. It stood by the truck, one impossibly long arm draped over the cab, head tilted at an angle that hurt to look at, watching us, studying us. A smell reached us then, sweet rot mixed with something chemical, like formaldehyde and decay. One of our dogs, Lobo, crept out from under the truck, hackles raised, a growl building in his throat. The thing moved faster than anything that tall and twisted should be able to. Its legs snapped out, catching Lobo in the ribs with a wet crunch. The dog flew through the air, yelping, and hit the ground running, disappearing into the darkness. The other dogs, wherever they'd been hiding, took this as their cue to flee. I heard them crashing through the sagebrush, heading for the hills. Then those horrible eyes fixed on me. The world went red at the edges. Not metaphorically. My vision actually tinted crimson, like looking through blood-stained glass. The smell intensified, coating the back of my throat with its putrid sweetness. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the primitive certainty that I was looking at something that shouldn't exist. Time stretched like taffy. I was dimly aware of Miguel Jr. stepping out of the outhouse behind me, his sharp intake of breath as he saw what held my attention. The thing's mouth stretched wider, revealing too many teeth, all sharp, all wrong. It took a step toward us, joints bending in ways that defied anatomy. Something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped back like a rubber band stretched too far. The paralysis shattered, replaced by rage so pure it burned through the fear. This thing was on our land, threatening our home, our family. A sound tore from my throat, not quite a scream, not quite a roar, but something primal that bypassed thought entirely. I charged. Looking back, it was insane, suicidal, but in that moment, with my brother behind me and this nightmare in front, instinct took over. I ran straight at it, flashlight raised like a club, that animal sound still pouring from my lungs. The thing's confident posture faltered. The grin slipped. For just a second, I saw something almost human flicker across those distorted features. Surprise, maybe even fear. Then it moved, flowing backward with that horrible liquid grace, vanishing into the darkness beyond the truck. We ran. No dignity, no looking back, just pure flight response. We crashed through the door, Miguel Jr. slamming it behind us and dropping the bar into place. I shoved our grandmother's heavy chest against it for good measure, then stood there gasping, shaking, trying to process what we'd just seen. Carlos was on his feet, rifle clutched uselessly in his hands. What happened? What was it? I opened my mouth to answer and found I had no words. How could I describe something that violated every natural law I knew? Miguel Jr. saved me from trying. There's someone out there, he said carefully. Someone sick, wrong. We need to stay inside until morning. It wasn't adequate, but it was something Carlos could grasp. His face went pale, but he nodded, checking the rifle even though we all knew it wasn't loaded. We spent the rest of the night in the main room, backs to the wall, watching the doors and windows. Every sound made us jump. The settling of the house, the pop of wood in the stove, our own breathing. The silence outside was complete, as if the entire desert was holding its breath. Around 3 a.m, something tested the door. Not knocking, pressing, sliding, searching for weakness. The wooden bar creaked but held. We heard breathing through the gaps, wet, labored, wrong. Miguel Jr. gripped a poker from the fireplace. I held a kitchen knife. Carlos had given up on the unloaded rifle and clutched a hammer. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the house. They paused at each window, and we could hear fingers, too many fingers, trailing across the glass, testing, probing, looking for a way in. At the back window, the one with the loose frame, the scratching intensified. The glass rattled. A shadow passed across it, tall, distorted, wrong. Carlos whimpered. I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood. Miguel Jr. stepped forward, poker raised, ready to defend our home. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The footsteps retreated. The oppressive presence that had been pressing against the house like a physical weight lifted slightly. We stayed frozen, weapons raised, until the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. Morning arrived like a reluctant friend, bringing visibility, but no real comfort. The sunlight seemed thin, watery, unable to fully banish the shadows that clung to corners and crevices. We were exhausted, running on adrenaline fumes and terror, but none of us had slept. Miguel Jr. was the first to venture to a window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. I don't see anything, he reported, but his voice lacked conviction. We needed to check the animals. Ranch life didn't stop for fear, and our parents would never forgive us if we let the sheep suffer because we were too scared to do our jobs. After a long debate, we decided to go out together, armed with whatever we could find. Miguel Jr. with the poker, me with a pitchfork from the storage room, Carlos with his hammer. The morning air was crisp and clean, almost mocking in its normalcy. Birds sang tentatively from the cottonwoods. A light breeze stirred the dust. If not for the evidence scattered around the yard, I might have convinced myself the night had been a shared nightmare. But the evidence was there. Tracks in the dirt, human-shaped but wrong, too long, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. They circled the house multiple times, paused at each entrance, clustered at the loose window. Some of the prints showed a dragging gait, others suggested impossible leaps. A section of the corral fence was damaged, thick wooden planks splintered, as if something immensely strong had tested them. Dark stains on the ground might have been blood. Several of the sheep showed scratches, parallel marks that looked deliberate rather than accidental. We need to find the dogs, Carlos said quietly. He was right. On a working ranch, dogs weren't pets. They were partners, essential for managing livestock and providing security. Without them, we were vulnerable. We found 3 of them hiding under the tool shed, pressed so far back we had to coax them out with food. Lobo, the one who'd been kicked, limped but seemed otherwise okay. Estrella was nowhere to be found. Neither was Viejo, our oldest and most experienced dog. The 3 survivors wouldn't leave our sides, tails tucked, constantly looking over their shoulders. Around midday, we spotted 2 sheep missing from the count. They could have wandered off in the chaos, pushed through the damaged fence section. We couldn't afford to lose them. Every animal counted on a small operation like ours. We have to look for them, Miguel Jr. decided, though I could see he hated the idea as much as I did. We'll go together, stay in sight of the house, and come back fast. We set off toward the low hills, where our sheep typically grazed when they escaped the pen. The path led through scattered Joshua trees and sagebrush, terrain we'd walked 1,000 times, but which now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow could hide danger. Every movement in our peripheral vision made us whirl around, weapons raised. The dogs stayed close but refused to range ahead as they normally would. Lobo kept growling low in his throat, the sound never quite stopping. It was nerve-wracking, like having a constant alarm that you couldn't shut off. We found the sheep about a quarter-mile from the house, huddled in a small ravine near a dying mesquite tree. They were terrified, bleating pitifully when they saw us. As we approached, trying to calm them enough to herd them back, movement in the shadows caught my eye. It was there, in broad daylight. The thing looked even worse in natural light. Its skin wasn't just pale, it was mottled, showing patches of discoloration like advanced decomposition. Black lines traced across its face and arms, following vein patterns but too dark, too prominent. Its clothes were definitely the remains of normal clothing. I could make out what might have been jeans, a flannel shirt, but they were stained with substances I didn't want to identify. It crouched in the shadow of an overhang, those red-tinged eyes fixed on us. The wide mouth split into that horrible grin, revealing teeth that belonged in a predator's mouth, not a human's. It moved slightly, and I realized it had been feeding on something. The remains were unidentifiable, but the smell of death was unmistakable. Carlos made a sound, half gag, half scream. The thing's attention shifted to him, head tilting with interest. It began to unfold from its crouch, rising to that impossible height, limbs moving with jerky, unnatural motions like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Miguel Jr. stepped forward, poker raised. "Get back!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Get away from here!" The thing laughed. The sound was worse than any scream, wet, bubbling, with undertones that made my teeth ache. It took a step toward us, then another, movements becoming more fluid, as if it was remembering how to use its body. I grabbed a rock and threw it, hitting the thing in the shoulder. It barely flinched, but the impact seemed to annoy it. The grin faded. It moved then, faster than before, scuttling sideways like a spider. We bunched together, weapons out, trying to track its movement. It circled us once, twice, getting closer each time. The sheep bleated in terror, breaking free from the ravine and bolting toward home. The dogs snarled but wouldn't advance, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. Just when I thought it would attack, it stopped, stood perfectly still, stared at us with those horrible eyes. Then, without warning, it turned and loped away, disappearing over a rise with speed that nothing that twisted should possess. We didn't wait to see if it would come back. We ran, following the sheep, constantly checking over our shoulders. The house had never looked so welcome, so safe, even though we knew walls and doors hadn't stopped it from trying to enter the night before. By late afternoon, we knew we couldn't stay another night. Whatever that thing was, diseased human, something worse, it was escalating. The daylight encounter proved it was getting bolder. We needed help, needed to get somewhere with more people, better defenses. "Mom and Dad should be back soon," Carlos said hopefully, but even he didn't sound convinced. The harvest dinner sometimes went late, especially if Uncle Jorge broke out his guitar. They might not return until well after dark. We spent the remaining daylight preparing. We brought the surviving dogs inside, along with extra water and the little food we had. Miguel Jr. found our father's hidden box of ammunition and loaded the rifle, though we all knew conventional weapons might not help. We reinforced the windows, moved furniture against weak points, and tried to make the house as secure as possible. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, our nerves were stretched to breaking. Every sound made us jump. The dogs paced restlessly, whining at shadows. We took positions at different windows, watching, waiting. Full darkness had just fallen when we heard engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt weak. Headlights swept across the yard as 2 trucks and a car pulled up to the house, our parents' vehicle and others from the family gathering. We rushed to unbolt the door, shouting warnings about what was out there. My mother's face went from joy at seeing us to horror as she took in our appearance, the exhaustion, the fear, the weapons clutched in white-knuckled grips. "Inside, now!" my father commanded, ushering everyone into the house. But as the last person crossed the threshold, I saw it again, standing at the edge of the headlight beams, tall and twisted and wrong, watching, waiting. My father saw it too. His face went hard, the expression of a man protecting his family. He grabbed a shotgun from his truck, stepped onto the porch. "You need to leave," he said, voice steady despite what he was facing. "This is our land, our home. You're not welcome here." The thing tilted its head, that horrible grin spreading across its face. It took a step forward into the light, and I heard my aunt scream. My father pumped the shotgun, the sound sharp in the night air. For a long moment they faced each other, man and monster, protector and predator. Then the thing laughed again, that wet, bubbling sound, and melted back into the darkness. But we could feel it out there, circling, waiting. My father made the decision quickly. "We're leaving, now, everyone in the vehicles." We didn't argue. We grabbed what we could carry and fled, a convoy racing through the night toward town, toward safety, toward sanity. In the rearview mirror, I watched our house disappear into the darkness, wondering if we'd ever feel safe returning. We stayed with family in town while my father contacted authorities. The sheriff's department searched the property, but found only the tracks, the damage, and Estrella's remains near the hills. No sign of the thing itself. They filed reports about a dangerous vagrant, possibly suffering from severe mental illness or disease. A medicine man from the reservation came a week later. He walked the property, performed ceremonies, and told us things about what might drive a human to become something else. Isolation, madness, chemicals from the old mines seeping into groundwater, or darker possibilities he wouldn't name. He cleansed the land as best he could, but warned us that some presences, once invited by violence and fear, were hard to fully banish. We never moved back to that house. My parents sold the sheep, leased the land to another rancher who only used it during daylight hours. The house stands empty now, slowly being reclaimed by the desert. Sometimes hunters or teenagers report strange sightings in the area. Tall shadows, red eyes in the darkness, the sound of wet laughter carried on the wind. I still dream about that night sometimes. About the moment when I charged at that thing, driven by protective rage. About what might have happened if we'd been alone just one more night. About what kind of sickness or evil could transform a person into something so wrong. But mostly, I remember the lesson that Ranch taught me. Sometimes the real horror isn't in what we imagine lurks in the darkness. Sometimes it's in discovering that the darkness can take human form, twist it, and send it walking among us with a smile full of too many teeth. We survived. That's what matters. But I'll never again assume that walls and doors are enough to keep out the things that hunt in the desert night. And I'll never forget the sound of that laughter, wet and wrong, and far too human for the thing that made it. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to post something like this online, but honestly, I don't know where else to go with it. I'm not looking for clicks or karma or sympathy. I just need someone, anyone, to hear this, and maybe believe me, because what happened out near Dry Creek wasn't just weird. It wasn't just a hallucination or desert fever or anything I can explain away. It was something else. It started 2 weeks ago. I'd driven up to northern Arizona to visit my mom after her stroke. She's okay now, mild symptoms, mostly affecting her balance. But it shook me enough to finally answer my dad's voicemails. They still live in Dry Creek, a little out-of-the-way junction about 30 minutes southwest of Sedona, close to the border of Coconino and Kaibab National Forest. The drive from Phoenix took nearly 3 hours. As I wound my way north on I-17, the sprawling desert gave way to scrubby highlands, then juniper, and finally the towering ponderosas that frame the Red Rock country. With each passing mile, memories flooded back. Summers spent exploring dry washes, nights under stars so bright they hurt to look at, and the uncomfortable silence that eventually drove me away. Dry Creek itself hadn't changed in the decades since I'd left. If you blink, you'll miss it. Just a couple of feed stores, a diner, and some ranch-style houses scattered between dirt roads and dry washes. The population sign still claimed 347 residents, though I doubted that many remained. My parents' house sat at the end of a long dirt driveway, the same faded blue with white trim, the same creaking porch swing, the same feeling of being watched by the surrounding wilderness. As I pulled up, dust billowing behind my car, I saw my father standing in the doorway, older and more weathered than I remembered, like the desert had slowly been carving him away. "You made it," he said, not moving to hug me. Just a nod. Classic. Inside, my mother sat in her favorite armchair, a crocheted blanket over her legs despite the warmth. Her smile was crooked now. The right side of her face slightly drooped. I tried not to stare. "About time you showed up," she said, her speech slightly slurred, but still carrying that familiar sharpness. I hugged her, feeling how small she'd become. We ate dinner in near silence, just the scrape of forks on plates and the occasional question about my job in Flagstaff. They didn't ask about friends or relationships. I didn't volunteer the information. Some things never change. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the same cracks in the ceiling, listening to the same desert wind whistle through the canyon. Something about being back felt wrong, like I was intruding on a past that had continued on without me. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under, but my dreams were filled with strange noises and shadowy figures just beyond my vision. That second night after dinner, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the ridgeline. It was one of those Sedona sunsets that paints the red rocks gold and turns the sky into fire. The temperature had dropped, making the evening almost pleasant. I mentioned how much the place hadn't changed, and my dad just nodded, taking a long sip from his coffee mug. "I knew it wasn't just coffee. You should check out Sycamore Canyon," he said after a pause. "Trail got reopened a few months back." I remembered that trail. We used to hike it when I was a teenager. It cuts through the northern edge of the wilderness area and has some incredible views if you know where to look. "They closed it?" "Went about 3 years ago. Some hikers went missing." His voice remained flat, matter of fact. "Never found 'em?" "Jesus," I muttered. "Don't take the Lord's name," my mother called from inside. Her hearing had always been uncanny. "Sorry," I called back, then lowered my voice. "What happened to them?" Dad shrugged. "Nobody knows. Couple of college kids from NAU. Search teams combed that canyon for weeks. Found a backpack, one shoe. That's it." I shivered despite the lingering warmth. "And they reopened it?" "Forest Service couldn't find a reason to keep it closed. No evidence of mountain lions, no unstable terrain. People need their hiking trails." His tone suggested what he thought of people and their recreational needs. I told him maybe I would check it out, and he nodded again, more serious this time. "But don't go past the old cattle gate," he added. "Not unless you want to see something that won't leave you alone." I laughed, couldn't help it. He always had a flair for weird warnings. Dry desert humor mixed with half-believed folklore. I grew up hearing those stories around campfires and cookouts. "What's past the gate?" I asked, humoring him, his eyes fixed on the darkening horizon. "Something that shouldn't be there." "Come on, Dad. Bears? Smugglers?" "What?" He drained his mug. "Nothing natural." Then he stood up, effectively ending the conversation. "Your mother needs her medication." I stayed on the porch as darkness swallowed the landscape, thinking about his warning. I figured he was just trying to give me one last spook for the road, like when I was a kid. But something in his voice, a tension I hadn't heard before, made the hair on my arms stand up. That night, I researched the missing hikers on my phone. 2 Northern Arizona University students gone without a trace while day hiking in Sycamore Canyon. The articles mentioned dangerous terrain and possible flash flood, but reading between the lines, it was clear authorities had no idea what happened. The comment sections were filled with speculation. Drug deals gone wrong, mountain lion attacks, even alien abductions. None mentioned anything about a cattle gate. The next evening, I drove out to the trailhead with a headlamp, a flashlight, and a full bottle of water. I started around 6:30 p.m. The sun was low, but there was still plenty of light. And the air was that perfect kind of cool that only happens right before the desert drops into the cold. The parking area was empty, except for my truck, which should have been my first warning. Sycamore Canyon is usually popular, especially at sunset. I checked my phone, no signal as expected. I texted my dad that I was at the trailhead, hoping it would send when I got back to coverage. Everything was familiar. The dusty trail markers, the rust-colored rocks lining the path, the whisper of pine higher up the ridge. The crunch of gravel underfoot echoed in the stillness. No birds called, no insects buzzed. The silence felt unnatural, like the wilderness was holding its breath, waiting. About 45 minutes in, I came across it. The gate, just like he said. It was old, maybe 60, 70 years if I had to guess. A rusted metal thing half swallowed by dirt and leaning sideways, like it was too tired to keep standing. The no trespassing sign zip-tied to it had been weathered down to just a ghost of words. The area past it looked wild, overgrown, less like a trail and more like a place the forest had decided to reclaim. The light was fading fast, casting long shadows that seemed to reach toward me like fingers. I stood there for a second. I really did consider turning back. My phone didn't have a signal, and twilight was rapidly approaching. Dad's warning echoed in my mind, but the rational part of me dismissed it as superstition. But then I heard something, faint, almost imagined, the sound of rushing water. There shouldn't have been any. Not in this part of the canyon, not in this season. Curiosity overrode caution. I stepped over the gate. The first thing I noticed was how fast everything changed. The dirt got softer, like it hadn't been walked on in years. The air got colder, even though the sun hadn't fully set. And the smell, it was faint but sharp, metallic, like pennies left out in the rain. The vegetation grew thicker, forcing me to push through tangled branches that seemed to clutch at my clothes. The light dimmed faster than it should have, as if the tree canopy had suddenly thickened. I followed a narrow, downward-sloping wash, ducking under low branches and stepping carefully over rocks until I reached it. The creek, it wasn't very wide, maybe 15 feet across, but it was moving fast. Crystal clear water cutting through stone that looked almost black in the fading light. It felt off, not wrong exactly, but out of place, like it didn't belong in this part of the canyon. And I'd hiked Sycamore Canyon a dozen times growing up. I'd never seen water run through this stretch, not even in spring. I turned on my flashlight. That's when I saw the footprints. They were on my side of the creek, maybe 10 feet from where I stood. At first, I thought they were human, bare feet, deep impressions in the sandy bank. But something about them made my stomach twist. The toes were too long, almost finger-like. The arch was too high, and the depth of the prints made no sense unless the thing that left them weighed 300 or 400 pounds. I crouched to get a closer look, sweeping my light over the prints. The mud glistened like it was fresh, like whatever made them had just been there. Then I heard it, my voice. "Over here!" It came from across the water, low, casual, almost like I was calling someone from behind a door. I froze. The flashlight beam jerked upward, slicing through the darkness on the far bank. Trees, rocks, movement. And then it stepped into the light. My brain couldn't register it at first. I saw a figure, humanoid definitely, but warped. Its arms hung too long, the knees bent forward, but too far, like they weren't built for walking upright. Its skin was pale and sagging, almost translucent, like it had been soaked in water for too long. And its head looked like mine, or was trying to. It was like a sculptor tried to make my face out of melted wax, close enough to make my stomach flip, but wrong in all the ways that mattered. Lips too wide, eyes too black, a grin stretched tight across the jaw, like someone had stapled it in place. "Over here," it said again. Same voice, my voice, but this time its mouth moved, badly. The words didn't match the motion. They came too slow or too fast, with gaps between syllables that didn't belong, like a recording that kept skipping. I backed up, my heel hit a rock and I stumbled. The flashlight dropped, rolling out of reach. When I looked back, it was gone. The far bank was empty, but the woods were silent now. Not quiet, silent. Even the creek had gone still, and that's when I heard the branches crack behind me. It was on my side of the water. I ran, no hesitation, no second guesses. I turned and ran, like something primal inside me had taken over. My heart hammered against my ribs, each breath burning in my lungs as I crashed through the underbrush, barely following the trail. I couldn't hear it at first, over my own heartbeat, but a few seconds in I realized it was behind me, following, stumbling, dragging, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. sometimes right next to me when I didn't hear it move at all. And then it started mimicking me again. "Help me!" it cried, voice breaking. "Please!" It wailed like a dying thing. It begged. It laughed. Every sound came in my voice. It sounded like me in pain, me sobbing, me screaming for someone to come back. The worst part was the authenticity. It wasn't just using my voice. It was using emotions I recognized. Fears I'd felt, words I'd said before. Intimate things no stranger could know. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I crashed through brush and nearly broke my ankle on loose stone. Branches slashed at my face, drawing blood that I could taste, metallic and warm. The night had become absolute, my headlamp the only circle of reality in a void of darkness. When the gate appeared in my beam, I nearly wept with relief. I vaulted over it, feeling something change in the air, like crossing a threshold. Behind me the sound stopped, just like that, cut off like someone had flipped a switch. I paused, gasping for breath, and made the mistake of looking back. It stood just beyond the gate, its head tilted at that awful angle, its body unnaturally still. In the dim light, it looked more like me than before, as if proximity to me had allowed it to refine its mimicry. Only the eyes were wrong, bottomless pits that reflected no light, and then it raised one hand and waved. A casual gesture, almost friendly. The fingers were too long, too jointed, but the motion was perfect, human, familiar. I ran the rest of the way to the parking lot, the image burned into my vision. When the faint reflection of my truck's taillights appeared in the dark, I nearly cried. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the door, locked it, and fumbled with the keys like a man trying to outrun death. When the headlights came on, I looked up. It was standing in the middle of the trail, its head tilted at that awful angle, its grin even wider now, its body slack like a puppet held up by invisible strings. How had it gotten ahead of me? How had it passed the gate? I reversed so fast the tires threw gravel, then spun the wheel and floored it down the access road. In my rearview mirror, I watched it shrink, still standing, still watching, until darkness swallowed it whole. I didn't talk to anyone on the drive back from Dry Creek. Not my parents, not my friends, not even my boss, who was expecting me to call in about work that Monday. I just got in the car, white-knuckled the steering wheel, and drove north up I-17 like something was still behind me. That night, when I got home to Flagstaff, I left all the lights on. I didn't sleep. I told myself I'd just seen something, a sick hiker, a deranged squatter, my mind making patterns out of shadows. But I knew that wasn't true, because what I saw by the creek, it knew me. It wore my voice like a mask. It wanted me to hear it, and the worst part, it wanted me to believe it was me. I didn't go to work that week. I didn't tell anyone why. I lied about food poisoning and shut myself in. I triple-locked the doors, pulled the blinds, slept with a baseball bat next to my bed and a flashlight under my pillow. I tried to convince myself it had stayed in the canyon, that whatever I saw belonged out there in that dark pocket of wilderness. But it didn't. It followed me home. I woke up that first night to a sound I couldn't immediately place. Soft, repetitive, like someone tapping on glass. I sat up in bed, frozen. My phone said 2:41 a.m. The tapping came again. It was coming from my bedroom window. I live on the second floor. The air in the room shifted, went still, heavy. My mouth was dry. I didn't want to look. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Don't look." But I had to. I turned, slow as death, and looked toward the window. Nothing, just closed blinds. No silhouette, no movement. No, then it spoke. "I see you." It was my voice, not a recording, not a hallucination. My voice, whispering from the other side of the glass. I didn't move for the rest of the night. When the sun finally came up, I went outside and checked the ground under the window. Nothing, no footprints, no scuff marks. Just clean dirt and frost-covered gravel. I told myself it was stress, PTSD or something. I even considered going to a doctor. But then the knocking started again. It didn't happen every night. Some nights were dead quiet, but those were the worst, because it meant I didn't know when it would come back. And when it did knock, It wasn't just one place. Sometimes it was the window, sometimes the back door. Sometimes, God help me, it was the garage, which I started padlocking. Each time it knocked, it said something different. I'm cold. I don't know where I am. You left me there, always in my voice. But as the days passed, the voice changed. The tone cracked, words slurred. Sometimes it sounded like me in pain, other times like me whispering through gritted teeth. And sometimes it didn't sound like me at all. It sounded like something trying to imitate me, like a broken speaker trying to speak a language it didn't understand. The worst was the laughter. It came on the fourth night. Around 3:10 a.m., I had just started to drift off when I heard it right outside the living room window. This dry, rattling cackle that started in my voice and twisted into something deeper, wetter, like it was laughing with a mouth full of blood. That night, I slept in my bathroom with the door locked, lights on and the bat on my lap, and then came the roof. I didn't hear it at first. I felt it, a low thud above me, then another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing from one end of the roof to the other. Heavy enough to creak the ceiling, light enough not to break through. I live alone. No pets, no upstairs neighbors. Just me and whatever the hell was now walking around above my bedroom, like it had every right to be there. Then came the voice, muffled, like it was speaking through the insulation. I'm so cold, it said. Please. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, above me, beside me, inside me. Then the pacing stopped, right above my bed. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I see you. I squeezed my eyes shut, clenched my hands over my ears, and still, I felt the words sink into my chest, like it was already in the walls, like it was already inside the house, and just waiting for me to say yes. When I woke up the next morning, there was nothing on the roof, no prints, no signs of forced entry, but the coppery smell from the canyon was in the house, faint but sharp, like something left a piece of itself behind. That was the first time I seriously thought I might be losing it. The constant fear was wearing me down. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch in days. I'd lost weight, my clothes hanging off me like they belonged to someone else. The face in the mirror looked hollow, eyes sunken, skin waxy. I started taking pictures of the windows, recording audio at night. I even set up my phone with a motion sensor app, but every time I looked at the results, nothing. The app would crash. The camera would stop recording. Once, the video played back with my face staring into the lens for 10 straight minutes. Completely still. I never hit record. I deleted it. I called my dad on the 6th day. It went to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I called the landline. My mother answered, her voice distant, confused. He's not here, she said when I asked for him. Where is he? A long pause. He went looking for you. What? I'm in Flagstaff, Mom. I left days ago. No, she said, voice suddenly clear. He saw you out by the back fence last night, standing there, watching the house. My stomach dropped. That wasn't me. He said it was. Said you were calling his name. I hung up and immediately tried his cell again. Voicemail. I left a message telling him to call me, that whatever he saw wasn't me, that he needed to stay away from it. I don't know if he ever got it. The following week it got worse. I came home from grabbing groceries, maybe 20 minutes tops, and found the front door open. Not wide open, just cracked. Like someone wanted me to know they could get in, but chose not to. Nothing was taken. Nothing moved, except in my bedroom, my mirror. There was a handprint on the glass, not pressed, not smudged, dragged. Like something slick with mud had slit its fingers down the surface. 5 long streaks, all pointed toward the base, and just above it drawn into the fogged glass. I see you. I haven't used that room since. I sleep on the couch now, if you can call it sleep. Most nights I lie awake until the sky starts to turn blue. Baseball bat on my chest, flashlight by my side. Trying not to think about the fact that whatever I saw in Sycamore Canyon isn't just following me. It's learning. It knows where I live. It knows my voice. And it knows how to sound like someone worth saving. The isolation was making it worse. I hadn't spoken to another human being in person for over a week. The few friends I had in Flagstaff had stopped texting after I ignored their messages. My boss had left a voicemail saying if I didn't show up Monday, don't bother coming back at all. None of it seemed to matter. The only thing that felt real was the thing that kept visiting. Night after night, getting closer, getting better at being me. I started talking to myself, just to hear a voice that wasn't coming from outside the walls. Sometimes I'd catch myself having entire conversations, asking questions, answering them. Once I realized I was using two slightly different voices. That's when I knew I had to go back. Had to end it. Whatever it was. I don't know what I expected when I went back to Sycamore Canyon. Closure maybe, answers, proof I wasn't losing my mind. Or maybe I just wanted it to end. The sleepless nights, the laughter outside the window. The way my own voice had started sounding wrong when I talked to myself in the mirror. I stopped recognizing it. Stopped recognizing me. Something had to give, so I packed what I thought I might need. My flashlight, a backup headlamp, my old hunting knife, and the baseball bat I'd been sleeping next to for 2 weeks straight. I even brought a bottle of whiskey I'd meant to leave for my dad as a gift. Not sure if I planned to drink it or use it as bait. Maybe both. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not that anyone would have believed me. I hit the trail just after 6 in the evening. The sky was bleeding out its last bit of orange by the time I passed the old rusted sign at the edge of the Sycamore Canyon wilderness. The same route I'd taken before, back when this all started. Only this time something was different. The cattle gate wasn't there. It was gone, completely. No frame, no hinges, not even the patch of disturbed earth it used to stand on. Just open desert and silence so thick it felt like sound had been vacuumed out of the world. I kept walking. The path twisted into the ravine like before, but it looked more overgrown now. Bushes clawing at my arms, trees leaning in like they were watching me pass. I hadn't noticed how the trunks bent inward before, or how the dirt underfoot felt soft, almost spongy, like walking on skin. The air turned cold again. The metallic smell was stronger this time. Copper and mold and old rot baked into the roots of the earth. That same sick sweetness I'd smelled by the creek. And then a sound, my voice. But not calling this time. It was singing low and slow, a song I didn't recognize, just a string of humming syllables in my cadence. It echoed faintly, bouncing off the canyon walls like it had been practicing. I should have turned back. I wanted to turn back, but something in me kept going. The water came into view a few minutes later. Same shallow creek, same black rocks lining the edge. Only this time there were footprints in the sand already, mine from before, perfectly preserved, like time hadn't touched them. And across the creek it was waiting. It stood ankle deep in the current, head low, arms limp at its sides, hair matted with filth. The water didn't move around it. It moved with it, like it was part of the flow. The flashlight beam caught its skin, pale, sagging, seamless in places like it had grown from the ground rather than been born. And its face. It was perfect this time. It didn't look like a twisted version of me anymore. It was me. Down to the scar on my eyebrow, the slight asymmetry in my jaw, the little mole behind my left ear. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. It tilted its head and smiled. I remember now, it said in my voice. You let me out. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My tongue felt heavy. My lungs felt watched. What are you? I finally managed to ask. It took a step forward. The water didn't splash. You, it said, before you left. It took another step. You, it said again, after you die. Its voice shifted, slid between tones. At one moment I was hearing myself, then my mother's voice, then my father's, then something else, something I didn't recognize. A hollow, empty vibration like wind blowing through a skull. I don't understand, I whispered. It smiled wider. You brought me back. I stumbled backward. My heel caught the edge of a root, and I nearly fell. My flashlight trembled in my hand. It didn't come after me. It just stood there, staring, watching. Then it began to change. Its skin rippled like water. Bones snapped into new positions. Limbs shortened and widened. Its face began to split open down the middle, like rotten fruit. Inside something darker, wetter. Eyes too many and too deep. It was wearing me. That's when I remembered the whiskey. My hands were shaking, but I fumbled the bottle out of my pack and yanked the cloth from my back pocket. I wrapped it around the neck, soaked it, and lit it with the emergency flare I'd packed just in case. The fire whooshed to life, orange and wild. I threw it as hard as I could. It landed just in front of the creature, in the dry brush by the creek. Flames snapped to attention, rising fast. The thing didn't move. It just watched the fire like it was curious. Then it opened its mouth again. "Thank you." I turned and ran. Branches whipped at my face. Something screeched behind me, not a voice, but the sound of hundreds of voices breaking at once. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I didn't care that I tripped twice, or that I dropped the headlamp, or that I couldn't feel my legs by the time I reached the road. When I saw my car, I sobbed. I drove until the sky turned gray behind me. That was 12 nights ago. Since then, the house has been quiet. No footsteps, no laughter, no voices begging to be let in. I've started sleeping again. I even spoke to my mom on the phone last night. She said Dad came home late that night, covered in dirt, clothes torn. He wouldn't talk about where he'd been. Wouldn't look her in the eye. He's been quiet since, spending hours staring out the window toward the canyon. I told her I was okay. I almost believe it. I went back to work. My boss was surprisingly understanding. Said I looked like I'd been through hell, which wasn't far from the truth. The routine has been good. Wake up, shower, drive, work, home, sleep. Normal things. Human things. Sometimes I catch myself staring at my reflection too long, looking for signs that something's different. Sometimes I speak out loud just to make sure the voice I hear is still mine. The fire I started burned through about 5 acres of Sycamore Canyon before Forest Service crews contained it. The news called it a campfire gone wrong. No one was injured. No one was charged. The trail has been closed again, this time due to environmental damage from recent fire activity. I wonder if they'll find the gate when they go to reopen it. I wonder if they'll notice how the creek shouldn't be there. I wonder if they'll see the footprints that look almost human, but not quite. I dream about it every night. In the dreams, I'm standing in that creek. The water is warm like blood. I'm looking at my hands, but they're not mine. They're longer, paler, wrong, and I'm waiting for someone to come find me. I wake up tasting copper, but this morning when I went to brush my teeth, I saw something in the mirror. A handprint. Just one. Clean, centered, the same shape as mine, but longer in the fingers. And behind me, from the hallway, I heard my voice say, "You're not done yet." I turned around. Nothing there. Just empty space and morning light. But when I looked back at the mirror, I noticed something I'd missed before. There was a smudge on my face, just below my eye. I wiped at it, and my finger came away wet, mud, the same muddy sediment from the creek bed. I don't think the fire killed it. I think the fire is what it wanted all along. A doorway. A way out of that canyon and into something else. And to me, I'm writing this as a warning. If you hike in northern Arizona, in Sycamore Canyon, or any of the wilderness areas near Sedona, and you come across a gate or a fence or any kind of barrier with warnings, turn around. Don't assume it's just superstition or government overreach or someone trying to scare you away from something beautiful. Some boundaries exist for a reason. And if you hear your own voice calling to you from somewhere it shouldn't be, don't answer. Don't look. Just run. Because I think there are things in this world that are hungry for more than just flesh. They want your life, your identity, your place, and they're learning how to take it. I'm going back to Dry Creek tomorrow. I need to talk to my dad. I need to know what he saw that night, what he knows about that canyon. I need to know if there's a way to stop this before whatever's happening to me is complete. I'll update if I can, if I'm still me enough to write. The rain hammered down on the windshield as I guided my truck along the winding forest road, headlights barely piercing the gloomy night. I glanced at the dash, only 10 miles to the rendezvous point deep in the remote Oregon wilderness. When I first got the call from my old army buddy Jake about this secret government job, I was desperate enough to say yes without asking too many questions. Ever since I got back from my last tour in Afghanistan, adjusting to civilian life in my small Pennsylvania hometown had been rough. The nightmares, the anxiety, the lack of purpose, it was eating me alive, not to mention drowning in debt and alimony payments. So when Jake said he had an off-the-books gig that would use my particular set of skills, I didn't hesitate. Guess that's how I ended up here, driving through the middle of nowhere to meet up with a team investigating God knows what. All I knew was that people had gone missing in these woods. There were whispers of some experiments gone wrong, and the big shots in D.C. wanted answers, but couldn't be officially connected to any of it. So they assembled a crew of ex-military to be their eyes and ears on the ground. I checked the GPS again. Looks like the meeting point was an abandoned logging camp tucked away at the dead end of this muddy forest track. As I rounded the final bend, I saw a cluster of dilapidated buildings emerge from the misty trees. A handful of other vehicles were parked haphazardly, their paint faded and speckled with rust. I pulled up next to a beat-up Jeep and killed the engine. The abrupt silence sent a shiver down my spine. This place had an unsettling vibe, like stepping into the middle of a horror movie. Every instinct told me to get back in my truck and get as far away from here as I could. But the stack of unpaid bills flashed through my mind. I needed this money. Grabbing my trusty Glock from the glove box, I tucked it into my jacket and headed for the old mess hall building, boots squelching in the mud. Dim light flickered through the cracks in the moldy walls. I could hear low voices coming from inside. With a deep breath, I pushed open the creaky door, ready to face whatever fresh hell awaited me in the heart of these eerie backwoods. Little did I know, no amount of money would be worth what the sinister secrets of this forest had in store for us. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Jake called out as I stepped into the mess hall. "About time you made it, Jason. Starting to think you might have wised up and bailed on this circus." I surveyed the room, taking in the 4 other faces, illuminated by the kerosene lanterns scattered on the tables. They looked about as rough as I felt, all hard eyes and tense jaws. Sorry, took a wrong turn a few miles back. "Cell service is shit out here," I replied, shaking rain from my jacket. "What's the sit rep?" Jake unrolled a crinkled map on the nearest table. "Brass says at least 8 people vanished in these woods over the past 3 months. Hikers, campers, even a ranger. Locals think it's some kind of animal attacks, but the higher-ups smell a rat." He jabbed a finger at a circled area. "Whatever's going on seems to be centered around this valley northwest of here. Plan is to hump all our gear out there at first light and establish a fob to run patrols and recon from." I frowned. Humping overland through dense brush and rough terrain was never fun, and these woods gave me a seriously bad vibe already. "Any idea what we might be walking into out there?" I asked. "Because I got a feeling it ain't just bears and bobcats making folks disappear." Jake met my gaze, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Wish I could tell you, but the intel is thin. Just stay sharp and expect anything." The dread settling in my gut told me anything was putting it lightly. I didn't want to say what I was really thinking, that maybe all the old stories I'd heard growing up out east in Pennsylvania about strange things in remote forests, stuff I always dismissed as backwoods superstition. Maybe those crazy tales had a kernel of truth, and now here I was, about to go poking around in the wilderness looking for God knows what. Part of me wanted to cut my losses and run now while I still could. But I needed this job, needed the money, and maybe some reckless part of my brain still craved the action, the sense of purpose. "Hoo-yah," I said flatly, slinging my rifle over my shoulder. "Let's get some rack time then." Got a feeling we're gonna need it. Pale sunlight glared off the raindrops, still clinging to leaves as we humped through lush forest in a wedge formation, escorting the civilian investigator up the rear with our packs and gear. The air was thick and steamy, and within 20 minutes my undershirt was soaked through with sweat. As we trudged up yet another thicketed slope, I wiped the perspiration from my brow and cursed myself again for taking this job. I should be back home in Butler right now, maybe blowing cash I didn't have at the bar, or catching some bass on the Susquehanna. But here I was instead, playing soldier again, for reasons that felt murkier by the minute. At the top of the ridge, our crew halted at the team leader's raised fist ahead. I squatted down, yanking a thorn branch off my damp pant leg. Jake doubled back, crouching beside me. "Investigator says his sensors are picking up something freaky in the valley ahead," he muttered. "Wants to send a scout team, me and you." "Great. So we're the canaries in this creepy coal mine," I groused, unscrewing my canteen for a hot swig of water. "Come on, it'll be good recon. And backup is here when we need it." We set out downslope, moving cautiously but efficiently and bounding Overwatch. Even through my focus on scanning the terrain, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Things were too quiet here, no insect or bird noises, just an oppressive stillness. Something glinting in the undergrowth ahead caught my eye. I made eye contact with Jake and we froze, rifles trained forward. I crept closer, using my barrel to carefully part the ferns. "Son of a," I breathed out. Nestled in the weeds was a shredded backpack. Dried blood caked on the torn fabric. A broken compass glittered in the dappled light. Jake keyed his radio. "Hound 1 to Hound Actual. We've got a possible sign of one of the missing hikers here. Coordinate check to follow." As he rattled off numbers, I slung my rifle and squatted to examine the grim find. This was fresh, past few days at most, based on the dried blood. My mind raced with questions. Why would a hiker be this far off established trails? What the hell mauled their pack like this? No way it was a normal animal. I was so absorbed that I almost missed the snap of a twig somewhere in the trees behind me. I whipped around, pulse suddenly thundering in my ears. A branch swayed lightly about 10 yards into the trees. "Jake," I hissed, unslinging my rifle as he turned to look at me. "Something is out there. We need to—" And then I saw it, a flicker of motion in the shadows that soon solidified into a silhouette, vaguely human-shaped but hunched and inhumanly tall, with limbs that seemed stretched out of proportion as it stiffly loped through the trees at an angle to flank us. The sharp snick of Jake racking his weapon's charging handle snapped me back to the moment as we took aim together at the nightmarish apparition drawing rapidly closer. Unable to fully comprehend the mind-bending wrongness of what stalked us through the misty woods. Time slowed to a crawl as the creature emerged from the trees, stepping into a shaft of sun that revealed the full horror of its form. Bits of tattered cloth dangled from its emaciated frame, which towered well over 7 feet tall. Stringy remnants of hair clung to mottled, waxy skin, stretched taut over bones. But worst was the face. Angular and elongated, with gaping black sockets where eyes should be. My finger tightened on the trigger as those hollow pits fixed right on me, and it took a staggering step forward with a jerky, marionette-like gait. "Frag out!" Jake snarled, lobbing a grenade towards the monster before opening up with his carbine. I squeezed off a burst as well. The muzzle flashes and grenade detonation, an overload of light and sound. The creature reeled backwards from the hail of bullets and shrapnel, but didn't drop. Dark, oily liquid splashed across its chest. Impossibly, it surged forward again. Jake was backpedaling while keying his radio. "Contact! Contact!" "Taking fire from unknown hostile. We are engaging." "Shit!" His transmission dissolved into a scream as another nightmare figure lunged from the underbrush right into him with startling speed, spindly arms wrapping round him like a vice. I swung my weapon and put a burst center mass into the second creature, but it just soaked up the rounds. Not even flinching, Jake's screams turned to gurgles, and I watched in numb shock as the thing wrenched his head to an unnatural angle with a sickening crack. A third creature was loping towards me now, jaws opening impossibly wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth dripping black fluid. Swearing, I squeezed the trigger again, only to hear the bolt lock back on an empty chamber. With no time to reload, I turned and sprinted up slope, legs burning and lungs heaving from the crushing terror. Branches whipped my face as I crashed through the brush, heedless of direction other than away. I could hear the bounding, uneven footfalls and splintered panting of the creatures pursuing me. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I saw all 3 horrors chasing me at unnatural speed. seeming to almost flow over rocks and logs. The ground disappeared from beneath my feet, and I pitched forward hard, skull bouncing off a mossy stone as I tumbled into a ravine. For a moment everything went black. I came to facing a canopy of trees swirling above me. It was quiet, no sounds of pursuit, but I could feel warm wetness spreading across my temple and an ominous numbness spreading through my extremities. As darkness crept into the edges of my vision, I struggled to understand how things had gone so disastrously wrong. What were those nightmares made real? My last rattled thought before slipping into unconsciousness was that I never should have left Pennsylvania for this hell in the misty Oregon forest. The old stories had been right all along. Muffled voices drifted in the blackness, slowly drawing me back from the void. "Let me work, or he's not gonna make it." A gruff male voice, a note of strain in it. "Can he talk? We need to know what they found." An authoritative, impatient tone. "I just pulled shrapnel and a 9mm slug out of his skull. He's not talking any time soon." I tried to move, to open my eyes, but a red wave of agony crashed over me, and I began to sink back into oblivion. "Wait, I think he's coming around." With a groan, I managed to crack my eyelids open. A blurry face swam into view above me. The investigator, Lewis, his thinning grey hair disheveled. "Sergeant Shaw, I know you're in rough shape, but this is critical. Did you see the subjects? What condition was Private Allen's body in?" I licked dry, cracked lips and croaked out a response. "Not human, like something from a nightmare. Took a grenade and bullets didn't stop." Each word sent lances of pain through my battered skull, but I needed him to understand the horror we encountered out there. They snapped Jake's neck like a twig. Left him in the ravine." Lewis went pale, his mouth tightening into a grim line. "Dear God, worse than I feared. We're dealing with a highly aggressive, resilient variant." I wanted to demand what the hell he was talking about, but darkness was rushing back in. The last thing I heard before slipping under again was Lewis snapping at the medic to keep me alive at all costs for further intel. The world went away for a merciful spell. When I next surfaced, I was propped in the front passenger seat of a Humvee, jouncing over rough terrain. The scenery outside the windows a blur of dark. "Rainy forest. Where?" I tried to ask. My mouth dry as cotton. Had to pull back to Medford. "You're the only one who made it out," the driver said curtly, not taking his eyes off the muddy track. "Brass says those freaks you ran into, some kind of bioweapon the Ruskies cooked up, got loose from a lab out here." My stomach clenched, and a wave of nausea crashed over me. I remembered the hollow eyes, the inhuman speed and strength. I thought of Jake, the crack of his spine. My friend, dead at the hands of abomination. I squeezed my eyes shut, sick with grief and a mounting, helpless rage at the fuckers who made those monsters. I should have stayed in Pennsylvania, stayed with a simple life that had at least made sense. Instead, I'd left behind everything familiar. Chased a fatter paycheck out to Oregon and the dark, deadly unknown that waited in her woods, and it would haunt me, stalk the corners of my mind, for the rest of my assuredly short, traumatized life. The ghostly face of evil made ungodly flesh, pursuing me through endless, misty forest. But this was a waking nightmare I knew I'd never escape. Rain streaked the grimy windows of the motel as I stared out blankly at the dreary Medford street. Nearly a week since stumbling out of the woods into a waking nightmare. More questions than answers, still swirling in my battered head. What exactly had we encountered out there? Who was really behind it? How deep did the secret go? The investigator, Lewis, had grilled me for hours, prying out every scrap of detail I could remember. The higher-ups wanted to know how their monsters performed. Like Jake dying was just an acceptable loss, collateral damage in their twisted experiment. I clenched my jaw, anger and disgust a hard knot in my chest as I watched a logging truck rumble past, Washington plates caked in mud, the same sort of trucks that might cart the equipment to whatever black site cooked up those abominations. Maybe I couldn't stop them directly, but I could pull one thread, see what unraveled. An hour later, I was stomping into the musty lobby of a Fleabag motel on the outskirts of Seattle. The address hastily scrawled on a scrap of paper clutched in my fist. Lewis's kid was a freshman at UW. Amazing what you could get a campus admin to cough up for a family emergency. Time to rattle the old man's cage. I pounded on room 108 and barged in when a disheveled Lewis cracked the door, shoving him back against the wall with a snarl. "You sick bastards aren't going to get away with this. I want real answers, not your Black Ops bullshit." But instead of the defensive outrage I expected, Lewis just leveled that cold, clinical stare at me. "Sergeant Shaw, you of all people should understand the need for discretion in these matters. Fuck your discretion. People are dead because of whatever you freaks cooked up in those woods. The public deserves to know." Such a noble, naive sentiment. "You think they could handle knowing what's really out there?" Lewis smiled thinly. "This bioweapon, as you call it, is just the start. What you faced is the future of warfare, of humanity itself." My blood ran cold at the understated zeal in his tone. The man fully believed in the nightmare he helped create. We had to understand what they did, unlock their secrets before someone else did first. It was inevitable, but we'll control it. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't some foreign power's twisted experiment. This was us, our own government playing God. "You're insane," I spat. "This isn't unlocking secrets, it's unleashing hell." Don't be so dramatic. With the right safeguards, the right oversight, this is the key to protecting our way of life. Imagine a world where we can engineer the perfect soldier, where frontline casualties become a thing of the past. That's worth the sacrifices. I stared at him, revulsion twisting my face. To so blithely wave off the human cost, the horror of what they'd done. You've seen what they can do firsthand. Are you really ready to just walk away? Lewis pressed. With your skills, your experience, you could help us refine the process, minimize the risks. Don't you want to be on the right side of history? For a beat, I wavered. The money, the chance to have a mission again, to maybe keep things from spiraling totally out of control. It was almost tempting. To not feel so goddamn helpless. But then Jake's face swam up in my mind, his expression frozen in a rictus of agony. I thought of all the innocents in those woods, ripped apart by unnatural claws and teeth, of the faces of soldiers yet to come, twisted into the same ungodly form as they refined the process. I met Lewis's smug gaze with a disgusted headshake. "Thanks, but I'm going to have to pass on the mad science. I didn't sign up to play Frankenstein for Uncle Sam." I released my grip and stepped back, bile rising in my throat. This won't stay buried. One way or another, the truth always comes out. And when it does, God help you all. I turned on my heel and stalked from the room before he could respond, slamming the door like a coffin lid. The chill Seattle rain soaked me to the bone as I walked to the car, but it couldn't touch the cold purpose crystallizing in my gut. I was going to find a way to burn this whole corrupt conspiracy down, come hell or high water, to avenge Jake and all the other victims of their hubris and greed. It didn't matter if I had to take on the whole damn government. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled out onto the glistening blacktop, aiming my wheezing truck east, back towards a home I never should have left. It was a long, dark road ahead, but somewhere out there I knew I'd find a way to make this right. One way or another, the world was going to know what evil had been seeded in the misty Oregon woods. And heaven help anyone who got in my way. I hunched over the rickety table in my dingy Harrisburg motel room, poring over a mess of old topographic maps and hastily scribbled notes. 3 weeks since my confrontation with Lewis in Seattle, and I still felt like I was chasing my own tail, always one step behind my elusive quarry. My life had become a single-minded quest to piece together a puzzle with too many missing edges. Late nights spent scouring obscure conspiracy sites on the dark web, chasing down cryptic references to secret projects and hushed experiments. Bleary, Bitter days, consumed with dead ends and crank calls, as I tried to get anyone in the know to crack open the door on the truth. But the shadowy government machine I was up against had circled the wagons tight. Nobody in the old DoD circles would so much as return a text. I didn't know if I'd been officially blacklisted or just written off as a head case chasing ghosts. The worst part was there was nowhere to turn, no one to confide in. Who would believe it? That nightmare figures stalked the Oregon mist, brewed up in some labyrinth of beakers and petri dishes. That an old squadmate had died at the hands of a man-made monstrosity. I'd be lucky to just get laughed out of the VFW halls. Weariness tugged at me, and I leaned back with a sigh, scrubbing at the stubble shadowing my jaw. 3 goddamn weeks and bupkis to show for it. I was running out of steam, out of trails to chase, out of hope that I could make those bastards pay for the evil they'd wrought. My eyes fell on the faded picture of Jake, and I taped to the grubby mirror, both drunk and beaming at some distant base's blurry sports bar. The ghost of a smile twisted my lips at the memory. Jake had always been a smart-ass ray of sunshine, keeping spirits bright no matter how black the suck got. Now who was going to do that with him gone? I owed him to never stop shoveling, to dig and dig, until I struck the vein of rot at the heart of this whole conspiracy. No matter how long it took or how much the spooks in suits wanted it buried, jaw clenched with fresh resolve, I grabbed my burner and dialed the latest breadcrumb, a grouchy retired spook out of Langley. His paranoid ass had agreed to a meet, though I wasn't holding my breath for anything actionable, but even the thinnest chance was better than sitting on my hands. Jake deserved better than that, and so did every poor bastard who might end up in the crosshairs when the next variant needed field testing. Those sick fucks might want to play God, but as far as I was concerned, it was long past time to bring the devils down from their tower. I'd find a way. 3 months had slipped by in a haze of restless chasing when the first signs surfaced that maybe I wasn't just a lone madman howling in the wilderness. Cryptic email from an account with more numbers than letters. Others know. Others want the truth. Darkest before dawn. An attached image showing a street sign for some nowheresville called Milford, Michigan. My pulse jackhammered as I scoured maps and message boards late into the night. Milford was a pissant little speck on the edge of Oakland County. But digging turned up reports of people disappearing in the area stretching back decades, always written off as runaways or animal attacks. And Oakland County was home to an abandoned Nike silo site from the Cold War days. It was thin, beyond thin, but it was more than I'd had in weeks. Maybe this mysterious contact was stringing me along, but I couldn't ignore the tug in my gut that said something rotten had taken root in Milford too. Dawn saw me roaring east on the turnpike, the city skyline of Pittsburgh, shrinking in my rear view as the Appalachians rolled by, sheathed in mist. 10 hours later, I was pulling off a deserted 2-lane blacktop into a heavily wooded rest area, the only soul for miles. I killed the engine and blew out a breath. This was it. The message had said to wait here. Every instinct screamed trap, but what choice did I have? I couldn't do this alone anymore. Restless, I climbed out to stretch my legs and check my gear for the 100th time. Pistol tucked at the small of my back, KA bar riding on my hip. A few nasty surprises just in case. I still had no idea what I might be walking into out here. The scuff of a footstep snapped my head up, hand dropping to the butt of my gun. A figure emerged from the tree line, hands carefully open and visible. "Sure? Stand easy," a woman's voice, measured and firm. She looked to be late 30s, nondescript in jeans and flannel, dirty blonde hair tugged back. Something about her bearing made me think ex-military. "You alone?" I asked sharply, scanning the woods behind her. My contact paranoia was on high. 5 by 5, she nodded. "I'm Gutierrez. Naval intelligence before this." She waved a vague hand. "Got sucked in like you did. Saw things in Libya. Things command said to forget. Couldn't let it go." I relaxed fractionally. She had the look, the lingo. If it was a setup, it was a good one. "What's this about others? What do you know?" I needed something concrete to grab onto. You're not the only one they've been running field tests on. Not the only one who lost people. Old pain flickered in her eyes, and my gut clenched in recognition. It's bigger than we knew, but we're not taking it lying down anymore. She pulled a thumb drive from her pocket, held it out. That's everything I've got so far. Names, dates, places, the parts of the web I could piece together. It's not enough to blow the lid off, but it's a start. I stared at the drive, mind whirling. With legit sources, real intel, maybe there was a chance. Maybe we could actually fight this thing. I reached out, my grubby fingers closing on hard plastic and metal. The first step on a long, perilous road, unfurling at my feet. But I wasn't walking it alone now. I met Gutierrez's steely gaze, jaw firming with purpose. So where do we start? The staccato pop of gunfire and dull crump of detonations rolled across the forested valley, underscored by inhuman shrieks and bellows. Oily smoke belched into the sky from the blackened husk of the compound at the valley's heart, the scene lit by guttering flames. I crouched behind the rusting hulk of an overturned SUV, struggling to ram a fresh mag into my carbine with shaking, blood-slick hands. Somewhere out in that roiling chaos, Gutierrez and the ragged band we'd pieced together waged a desperate holding action against nightmares made flesh. 2 years of painstaking cloak and dagger, clandestine meetings in shithole motels, and coded drops on dark web forums had led us here, to the beating heart of the conspiracy's mad science, to the frantic 11th-hour assault to shut it down before their horrors spread any further. How many of these black sites were left out there, churning out weapons-grade evil in the name of national security? How deep did it go? The questions rattled around my skull, but there was no time to grapple with them now. The comm crackled at my shoulder, Gutierrez's ragged voice barely audible over the din. Eastern perimeter is collapsing. They just keep coming, not sure how long we can... A burst of gunfire, a scream. Damn it. Sure, I don't know if... Fall back to the lab. I snapped, lurching up to lay down covering fire at the jerky silhouettes bounding out of the trees. Hold what you can, but don't throw your lives away. This only works if we get the data out. A hurried double click acknowledged the order as I vaulted the SUV and sprinted for the building's yawning entrance. Bullets sparking off the cracked pavement at my heels. The strap of the dented hard case, containing the stolen servers and tissue samples, thudded against my spine with each footfall. It was all there, the proof of how deep the rot of hubris and unchecked power had spread. The only thing that could scour this infection from the body public if we could get it into the right hands. The only thing that would make all the blood and loss worth it. I burst through the mangled security doors, diving into a strobing, smoke-choked corridor. The countdown to detonation of the strategically placed det cord was already ticking away in my head. No matter what it took, no matter how close the beasts from our own abyss snapped at our heels, I would see the truth come to light. For Jake, for all of us, the misty pines would hold their secrets no more. I stepped out of my rental car onto the dusty gravel driveway, the desert heat hitting me like a wall, even though the sun was setting. My grandparents' trailer sat weathered and tired against the vast New Mexico landscape, its aluminum siding reflecting the last orange rays of daylight. I hadn't been back to the reservation in 3 years, and the familiar smell of sage and dry earth brought back childhood memories I thought I'd forgotten. The Navajo Nation Fair had been everything I remembered and more. Fry bread vendors lined the dusty walkways. Children ran between carnival rides while their parents caught up with relatives they hadn't seen in months. And the evening air buzzed with laughter and traditional music. My grandmother, Patricia, had insisted we stay until the last dance competition ended, her weathered hands clapping enthusiastically as young performers moved in intricate patterns under the string lights. By the time we returned to the trailer, it was well past 9 o'clock. My grandfather, Vincent, moved slowly up the wooden steps, his arthritic joints protesting after hours of walking on uneven fairground terrain. The trailer's interior felt cramped but welcoming, filled with family photographs spanning decades and the lingering aroma of the mutton stew Patricia had prepared that morning. We settled into the small living room, my cousin James and I sharing the worn plaid couch, while my Aunt Rita claimed the reclining chair that had seen better days. The conversation flowed naturally between English and Navajo, stories about distant relatives mixing with good-natured gossip about neighbors and friends. My grandmother's eyes sparkled as she recounted tales from her childhood, her voice carrying the musical quality that made even mundane stories captivating. The hours slipped by unnoticed. James shared updates about his job at the power plant, while Rita described her daughter's recent graduation from college. Vincent occasionally interjected with dry humor that made us all laugh, his timing perfect despite his advancing age. The familiar sounds of the trailer settling around us created a comforting backdrop to our reunion. As the clock on the kitchen wall approached 2 in the morning, fatigue should have been settling into my bones. Instead, I felt oddly energized, perhaps from the excitement of being home or the strong coffee Patricia had served with dessert. The conversation had lulled into comfortable silence when curiosity got the better of me. "Are Skinwalkers real?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. The transformation in the room was immediate and unsettling. Patricia's face drained of color, her warm expression replaced by something that looked like fear mixed with anger. Vincent's jovial demeanor vanished entirely, his weathered features hardening into stern lines. Even James, who had been relaxed moments before, straightened in his seat with obvious discomfort. "We don't talk about such things," Patricia said firmly, rising from her chair with surprising speed. "Speaking of them brings attention we don't want." Her voice carried a weight that made my stomach clench with unease. Without another word, she gathered Vincent and disappeared into their bedroom, leaving the 3 of us sitting in awkward silence. The cheerful atmosphere that had filled the trailer moments before now felt heavy and oppressive. Rita shook her head at me, a mixture of disappointment and concern in her expression. "You shouldn't have asked that," she whispered, glancing toward the closed bedroom door. "Grandmother's right. Some things are better left alone." But instead of dropping the subject, Rita leaned forward and began speaking in hushed tones about her recent experiences in Farmington. She described waking in the middle of the night to sounds that defied explanation, screams that started human but devolved into something else entirely. The terror in her voice as she recounted trying to comfort her daughter, who had heard the same sounds and spent the rest of the night crying, made my skin crawl. "I told myself it was just coyotes," Rita continued, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "But coyotes don't sound like that. There was something underneath the screaming, something that made every instinct I had tell me to run and hide." James listened with growing unease, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if expecting something to appear. The trailer felt smaller somehow, the walls thinner, the darkness outside more threatening. When Rita finished her account, we sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. Eventually, fatigue began to take hold, and we prepared for bed. James headed to the spare room, while Rita settled onto the pull-out couch in the living room. I made myself comfortable on an air mattress in the corner, but despite my exhaustion, rest remained elusive. The conversation replayed in my mind, Patricia's fear and Rita's trembling voice echoing in the darkness. The trailer's windows were open to catch the desert breeze, and every small sound seemed amplified in the stillness. The settling of old wood, the whisper of wind through dry grass, the distant hum of the refrigerator, all became part of a symphony that kept me alert and listening. The silence outside was wrong. In all my visits to the reservation, I had never experienced such complete quiet. No cricket songs, no distant howling of coyotes, no rustle of small animals moving through the brush. It was as if the entire desert had been stripped of life. leaving only an oppressive void that pressed against the thin walls of the trailer. I lay on my air mattress, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that the unsettling conversation had simply made me paranoid. The luminous hands of my watch showed 3:15 in the morning when I first heard the footsteps. They were deliberate but cautious, the sound of something trying not to be detected while moving across the gravelly area behind the trailer. Each step seemed calculated, placed with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. My heart began hammering against my ribs as I strained to identify the source of the sound. Rising carefully from my makeshift bed, I crept toward the kitchen window that faced the backyard. The single porch light cast a weak yellow glow across a small portion of the property, creating more shadows than illumination. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The old picnic table where we'd eaten lunch, the scattered lawn chairs, the line of cars parked parallel to the gravel road. Then I saw it. Behind Vincent's pickup truck, a shape moved with fluid grace that seemed at odds with its awkward posture. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but something about its proportions was fundamentally wrong. The torso appeared too long, the legs positioned at angles that defied natural anatomy. Its fur was matted and dark, hanging in clumps that caught the weak light in unsettling ways. The creature's eyes reflected the porch light with an orange glow that burned into my memory. They held an intelligence that was distinctly malevolent, a focused hatred that seemed directed specifically at the trailer and everyone inside it. When it moved, there was a hitching quality to its gait, as if it was still learning how to coordinate its borrowed limbs. My mouth went dry as I watched it circle Vincent's truck, its head turning constantly as it scanned the area. The smell hit me then, a nauseating combination of decay and corruption that seemed to seep through the window screen and fill my nostrils. It was the smell of something that had been dead and rotting, then somehow reanimated into a mockery of life. I backed away from the window, my legs trembling as I stumbled down the narrow hallway toward my mother's room. She was staying in the small guest bedroom, and I shook her awake with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Mom," I whispered urgently, "there's something outside." She sat up immediately, her maternal instincts overriding the fog of interrupted dreams. "What do you mean, something?" "Behind the cars. It looks like a coyote, but it's wrong. Everything about it is wrong." She followed me back to the kitchen window, and we both peered out into the darkness. The creature had moved closer to the trailer, positioning itself near the propane tanks on the side of the building. In the better light, we could see more details that made my skin crawl. Its fur was sparse in places, revealing patches of skin that looked mottled and diseased. The way it held its head suggested intelligence, but there was also something deeply disturbed about its movements. It would pause periodically, tilting its head as if listening to sounds we couldn't hear, then continue its restless pacing. The thing began to vocalize, a low, guttural sound that started as a moan, but evolved into something that resembled distorted human speech. The words, if they were words, were unintelligible, but the malevolent intention behind them was unmistakable. The sound penetrated the trailer's thin walls and seemed to vibrate in our bones. My mother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Get Vincent," she whispered. "Now." I crept to my grandparents' bedroom and tapped gently on the door. Vincent emerged within seconds, fully alert despite having been asleep moments before. When I described what we'd seen, his expression grew grim and determined. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a small handgun and a leather pouch containing what looked like grey ash. With practiced movements, he began coating several bullets with the powdery substance, muttering prayers in Navajo under his breath. "Wake, everyone," he instructed quietly. "Get them into the living room, away from the windows." Within minutes, the entire family had gathered in the center of the trailer, huddled together like survivors of a disaster. Patricia clutched her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer, while Rita held her daughter close. James positioned himself near the front door, baseball bat in hand. Vincent moved to the kitchen window and peered out. The creature had grown bolder, approaching the trailer's steps with a limping gait that somehow made it more threatening rather than less. It paused at the bottom of the wooden steps, raised its malformed head, and released a howl that made everyone in the room flinch. The sound was layered with wrong harmonics, as if multiple voices were trying to emerge from a single throat. It conveyed rage, hunger, and something else that I couldn't identify, but instinctively feared. Vincent responded by flinging open the front door and shouting commands in Navajo, his voice carrying authority and anger. When the creature didn't retreat, he raised the gun and fired 2 shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck the ground near the thing's feet, sending up small puffs of dust and ash. The creature recoiled as if it had been physically struck, then turned and fled with impossible speed, disappearing into the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. The sunrise should have brought relief, but instead it revealed the evidence of our nighttime visitor's presence. Deep scratches marked the wooden steps where the creature had paused, and several of Patricia's potted plants had been overturned and scattered. The nauseating smell lingered in the morning air, mixing unpleasantly with the scent of sage and desert flowers. Vincent walked the perimeter of the property, his weathered face grave as he examined the tracks left in the soft earth. The prints were disturbing, elongated paw prints that occasionally showed what looked like finger marks, as if the creature had been walking on its hind legs at times. It was testing us, he said when he returned to the trailer, seeing how we would react, what our defenses might be. A friend of Vincent's, a medicine man named Robert, arrived around 8 o'clock that morning. He was an elderly man with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. After hearing our account of the night's events, he began a blessing ritual that lasted over an hour. Robert moved through each room of the trailer, burning cedar and sage while chanting in Navajo. The smoke from his bundle of sacred herbs created intricate patterns in the still air, and I found the rhythmic cadence of his prayers oddly comforting. He sprinkled corn pollen at each window and doorway, creating protective barriers that were invisible but somehow tangible. When he finished, Robert spoke to all of us together, his voice carrying the weight of generations of accumulated wisdom. What visited you last night is dangerous and persistent. It has marked this place and everyone in it. You must be vigilant and follow the old protections until it loses interest and moves on. The family spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, jumping at unexpected sounds and constantly checking the windows. I tried to convince myself that daylight would provide safety, that whatever had stalked us in the darkness wouldn't dare approach during the day. I was catastrophically wrong. Around 2 in the afternoon, I decided to help Rita clean out the bed of her pickup truck. We had been working for about 20 minutes, sorting through accumulated debris and loading trash bags, when I heard a low growling from somewhere behind the trailer. The sound was unmistakable, the same guttural rumble we had heard the night before. But hearing it in broad daylight, under the harsh New Mexico sun, made it somehow more terrifying. It suggested a boldness and confidence that turned my blood to slush in my veins. Rita and I froze, our eyes meeting across the truck bed. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we both knew we had heard. The growling continued, a steady rumble that seemed to emanate from multiple directions at once. We moved carefully around the side of the trailer, following the sound toward a pile of discarded wooden pallets that Vincent had been meaning to dispose of. Perched on top of the unstable stack, as comfortable as a cat on a sunny windowsill, was our nocturnal visitor. In the harsh daylight, it looked even more wrong than it had in the darkness. Its fur was patchy and discolored, hanging in matted clumps that revealed areas of scarred, diseased-looking skin underneath. The creature's size seemed to shift as I watched, sometimes appearing smaller and more compact, other times stretching into elongated proportions that hurt to look at directly, its orange eyes fixed on us with unmistakable malevolence. There was an intelligence in that gaze that was more disturbing than any animal cunning. a calculating awareness that suggested it understood exactly what effect its presence was having on us. The thing opened its mouth, revealing teeth that were too numerous and positioned at wrong angles. A thick, dark liquid dripped from its jaws, staining the wooden pallets below. The smell of decay intensified, mixing with something chemical and acrid that made my eyes water. Without warning, the creature leaped from its perch with disturbing grace. Despite its apparent injuries from the night before, it moved with fluid precision, landing silently on the ground and immediately melting into the shadows cast by an old storage shed. Rita grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh with desperate strength. She began whispering prayers in Navajo, her voice shaking with terror and determination. We stood there for several minutes, scanning the area around the shed, but saw no further sign of the creature. When we returned to the trailer and reported what we had seen, the family's anxiety reached a new level. Patricia began preparing traditional protective items, small pouches of herbs and blessed corn pollen that we were instructed to carry at all times. Vincent cleaned and reloaded his gun, this time preparing twice as many ash-coated bullets. The afternoon dragged by with unbearable tension. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound potentially dangerous. The creature's willingness to appear in daylight had shattered our assumptions about when we might be safe, leaving us feeling vulnerable and exposed, regardless of the time or circumstances. As evening approached, the family made a collective decision to spend the night elsewhere. Rita's sister lived about 30 miles away, and we began packing overnight bags with the desperate hope that distance might provide the safety that daylight had failed to offer. Despite our plans to leave, curiosity and a misguided sense of bravery led four of us to make a fateful decision. James suggested we investigate the old storage shed where the creature had disappeared that afternoon, reasoning that if something was attracting it to the property, we needed to identify and remove it before leaving. Vincent initially refused to consider such a reckless plan, but eventually the logic wore him down. If we could determine what was drawing the creature to us, we might be able to eliminate the threat permanently, rather than simply running away and hoping it wouldn't follow. As the sun set behind the distant mesas, casting long shadows across the desert landscape, James, Rita, Vincent, and I made our way across the property toward the weathered shed. The structure was older than the trailer, its corrugated metal siding streaked with rust and age. Vincent carried his gun, while the rest of us armed ourselves with flashlights and whatever improvised weapons we could find. The walk across the open ground felt interminable, though it couldn't have been more than 200 yards. Every step seemed to echo in the evening stillness, announcing our presence to anything that might be watching. The desert around us was bathed in the orange and purple hues of sunset, beautiful and terrible in its vastness. The shed's door hung slightly ajar, creaking gently in the evening breeze. Vincent approached first, gun raised and ready, while the rest of us positioned ourselves to either side of the entrance. The smell hit us before we could see inside, the same nauseating combination of decay and corruption that had marked the creature's presence. James pushed the door open wider, revealing the cluttered interior of the old storage space. Boxes of forgotten belongings were stacked haphazardly against the walls, interspersed with broken furniture and rusted tools. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust that showed no signs of recent disturbance. We entered cautiously, our flashlight beams sweeping across the accumulated debris of decades. I was examining a stack of water-damaged cardboard boxes when we heard the first scraping sound against the metal siding outside. The noise was subtle but unmistakable, the sound of claws or fingers dragging across the corrugated surface with deliberate slowness. It circled the building methodically, as if the creature was taking inventory of our exact positions within the confined space. Rita moved closer to the door, peering out through the narrow gap between the frame and the partially closed panel. Her sharp intake of breath told us she had seen something that confirmed our worst fears. "It's right outside," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the continuing scraping sounds. Vincent motioned for all of us to move away from the walls, clustering in the center of the shed where we would be furthest from the creature's reach. The scratching continued, sometimes pausing as if the thing was listening to our movements, then resuming with increased intensity. A low, rhythmic thumping began against the rear wall of the shed, as if something large was repeatedly throwing itself against the metal siding. The impacts weren't violent enough to breach the wall, but they were consistent and purposeful, creating a maddening percussion that seemed designed to drive us to panic. James reached for the door handle, intending to make a run for the trailer when the scratching suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the sounds had been, filled with anticipation and dread. Vincent nudged the door open just enough to peer outside, and what he saw made him immediately slam it shut and begin searching for something to use as a barricade. The creature was crouched directly in front of the shed, its malformed body positioned like a coiled spring, ready to launch itself forward. We began stacking boxes and broken furniture against the door, creating as substantial a barrier as the limited space and materials would allow. The thumping against the rear wall intensified, joined now by scratching sounds from multiple directions, as if the creature was circling the building while simultaneously attacking it. Through a small gap in the siding, I caught a glimpse of the thing as it moved past. Its proportions seemed to shift and flow in the dim light, sometimes appearing more canine, other times taking on disturbingly human characteristics. The orange glow of its eyes cast eerie shadows on the metal walls, creating dancing patterns that hurt to look at directly. The vocalizations began again, that horrible mixture of animal sounds and distorted human speech. But this time, the sounds seemed to be coming from directly above us, as if the creature had somehow positioned itself on the shed's roof. The metal groaned and buckled under what must have been considerable weight. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as the creature moved across the roof, its claws or feet creating a constant scratching that echoed through the confined space. Occasionally, we would hear what sounded like words in the cacophony, fragments of English and Navajo mixed together in ways that made no linguistic sense but somehow conveyed malevolent intent. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. Then as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The scratching, the thumping, the vocalizations all ceased simultaneously, leaving us in a silence so complete it seemed to press against our eardrums. Vincent waited several minutes before carefully removing enough of our makeshift barricade to peer outside. The area around the shed appeared empty, but the smell of decay lingered in the air, and fresh gouges in the metal siding provided clear evidence of our visitors' presence. We made the return journey to the trailer in a tight group, constantly scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The familiar lights of the small building had never looked more welcoming, and we locked the door behind us with profound relief. The decision to leave the property the next morning was unanimous, but our hopes for safety were quickly shattered. We loaded 2 cars with overnight bags and drove toward Rita's sister's house, taking the winding road that connected our remote location to the more populated areas of the reservation. About 10 miles from the trailer, we stopped at a small grocery store to purchase supplies for our temporary relocation. The building was typical of reservation commerce, a single-story structure with weathered siding and hand-painted signs advertising everything from fresh mutton to phone cards. I was helping load grocery bags into the trunk of Vincent's car when Rita called out in a voice tight with fear. She was pointing toward the edge of the parking lot, where a line of desert shrubs created a natural barrier between the store and the open landscape beyond. There, partially concealed by the scrubby vegetation, but clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for, was our tormentor. The creature crouched motionless in the shadows, its orange eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent light from the store's exterior signs. What made the sighting particularly disturbing was the setting. This wasn't the isolated darkness of the trailer property or the concealment of the storage shed. This was broad daylight in a public space, with other customers moving in and out of the store and vehicles passing regularly on the nearby road. The thing's boldness in appearing so openly suggested a level of confidence that turned my stomach. It was no longer content to stalk us from the shadows. It wanted us to know we were being hunted, regardless of where we went or how many people were around. Several other customers had noticed the creature by now, and their reactions confirmed that this wasn't simply a case of mistaken identity or overactive imagination. A middle-aged woman loading groceries into her pickup truck stopped what she was doing and backed toward the store entrance, her eyes never leaving the spot where the creature lurked. An elderly man who had been checking his truck's tires straightened up and began speaking rapidly in Navajo to his companion, both of them casting nervous glances toward the creature's hiding spot. Their body language spoke of recognition and deep concern rather than mere curiosity about an unusual animal. The creature remained motionless for several long minutes, as if it was deliberately allowing us to observe it and register the implications of its presence. Then, with the same fluid grace we had witnessed before, it rose from its crouched position and moved away from the parking lot with an unhurried gait that somehow conveyed arrogance. We finished loading our groceries in silence, each of us processing the disturbing reality that our attempt to escape had been anticipated and countered. The creature wasn't simply haunting a specific location, it was following us, adapting its behavior to our movements and decisions. The drive to Rita's sister's house was tense, with all of us constantly checking mirrors and scanning the roadside for any sign of pursuit. The landscape that had always seemed welcoming and familiar now felt threatening and exposed, as if danger could emerge from behind any rock formation or stand of trees. When we arrived at our temporary refuge, Rita's sister Martha greeted us with obvious concern. Word of our situation had already reached her through the informal communication network that connected reservation families, and she had been expecting our arrival. Martha's house was larger and more modern than Vincent and Patricia's trailer, with better lighting and more secure doors and windows. We spent the first hour conducting a thorough inspection of the property, looking for any signs that the creature had preceded our arrival or discovered our new location. The afternoon passed quietly, and we began to hope that perhaps the distance and change of location had indeed provided the safety we sought. Martha prepared a large meal, and for the first time in days, the family gathered around a dining table without the constant tension that had marked our recent meals. As evening approached, however, familiar sounds began to emerge from the darkness outside. The scratching against exterior walls, the low growling, the disturbing vocalizations that mixed animal sounds with fragments of human speech. All had followed us to our new location. Martha's property was more open than Vincent's, with fewer hiding places and better sight lines in all directions. This should have been an advantage, but instead it seemed to make the creature bolder. It moved openly across the yard, circling the house with a confidence that suggested it no longer felt the need for concealment. The psychological impact of realizing that distance provided no protection was devastating. If the creature could track us anywhere we went, if it could appear in populated areas during daylight hours, if it could adapt its hunting behavior to any environment we chose, then traditional concepts of safety and refuge became meaningless. Vincent began preparing for another long night of vigilance, coating bullets with ash and positioning himself near the front windows where he would have the clearest field of fire. The rest of us gathered in the central living room, armed with flashlights and improvised weapons, settling in for what we all knew would be another sleepless ordeal. The third night brought an escalation that surpassed our worst fears. We had arranged ourselves throughout Martha's living room, trying to create defensive positions that would allow us to monitor all approaches to the house while staying away from windows and exterior walls. The initial sounds were familiar: the scratching against siding, the low growls, the circling movements around the perimeter of the building. But as the hours passed, the creature's behavior became increasingly aggressive and focused. Around midnight, the scratching concentrated on the front door, becoming more intense and purposeful. We could hear the wood splintering under whatever claws or tools the creature was using, and small pieces of debris began falling from the doorframe onto the interior floor. Vincent positioned himself directly in front of the door, gun raised and ready, while the rest of us clustered behind furniture that might provide minimal protection. Patricia and Martha had begun chanting in Navajo, their voices rising in traditional prayers that seemed to resonate in the confined space. The attack on the door intensified, with gouging sounds that suggested the creature was methodically working to breach our defenses. The door was solid wood, much sturdier than the trailer's lightweight construction, but even it began to show signs of damage under the persistent assault. Deep scratches appeared in the interior surface, visible evidence that whatever was outside possessed both the tools and the determination to eventually break through. Wood chips scattered across the floor with each impact, creating a growing pile of debris that marked the creature's progress. The vocalizations that accompanied the physical attack were the most disturbing aspect of the entire ordeal. The sounds had evolved beyond simple animal noises or distorted speech fragments into something that resembled a conversation, as if the creature was speaking to itself or to us, describing its intentions in a language that bypassed rational understanding and communicated directly with our deepest fears. At one point, the sounds stopped completely, and we heard what seemed to be breathing just outside the door. The silence was more terrifying than the active assault had been, filled with the anticipation of whatever might come next. Vincent called out in Navajo, his voice carrying authority and anger as he demanded that the creature leave our family alone. His words seemed to provoke a response, because the attack resumed with doubled intensity, accompanied by a howling that made everyone in the room cover their ears. The sound penetrated the walls and seemed to vibrate in our bones, carrying harmonics that no natural throat could produce. It conveyed rage and hunger in equal measures. But underneath those emotions was something else, a kind of satisfaction, as if the creature was enjoying our terror and drawing strength from our fear. Martha joined Patricia in the protective chanting, and their combined voices created a counterpoint to the creature's howling that seemed to provide some relief from its psychological impact. But the physical assault on the door continued, with splinters of wood now flying several feet into the room with each impact. Just when it seemed the door might give way entirely, the attack stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The silence that followed was absolute. No scratching, no growling, no movement of any kind. We waited in tense anticipation for several minutes before Vincent carefully approached the damaged door. The exterior surface was scored with deep gouges that revealed the pale wood underneath the weathered finish. Some of the scratches were clustered around the door handle and lock, suggesting the creature had been trying to figure out the mechanism, and while others formed random patterns that seemed to serve no practical purpose. Vincent opened the door just enough to peer outside, gun at the ready. The yard appeared empty, but the overwhelming smell of decay hung in the night air like a physical presence. Fresh tracks in the soft earth around the doorstep showed where the creature had positioned itself during the attack. We spent the remainder of the night in shifts, with two people always awake and watching while the others tried to rest. But genuine rest was impossible under the circumstances, and dawn found us all exhausted and on edge, jumping at every small sound. The damage to the door provided physical evidence of what we had experienced, but it also represented something more troubling, proof that the creature was capable of persistent, focused attacks that could eventually breach our defenses if given enough time and opportunity. The morning after the door attack brought Robert back to us, this time accompanied by another medicine man whose reputation for dealing with malevolent spirits extended throughout the reservation. The second elder, named Gary, was younger than Robert, but carried himself with the same quiet authority that marked those who understood forces beyond ordinary experience. The two men examined the damage to Martha's door with grave expressions, speaking to each other in hushed Navajo while tracing the scratch patterns with their fingers. Their body language suggested that what they were seeing confirmed their worst fears about the nature of our tormentor. "This one is very strong," Gary finally said, addressing all of us as we stood in Martha's living room. "It has fed on fear and attention for many days now, growing bolder and more powerful with each encounter." Robert nodded in agreement, opening a leather satchel that contained various items for the blessing ritual they were about to perform. "We must perform a comprehensive cleansing, not just of this house, but of all of you individually. The creature has marked you, and those marks must be removed before it will lose interest." The ritual that followed was unlike anything I had previously witnessed. Both men began by smudging each room of the house with burning sage and cedar, creating thick clouds of aromatic smoke that seemed to cling to the walls and ceiling. They chanted continuously in Navajo, their voices weaving together in complex harmonies that seemed to resonate with something beyond the physical world. Each family member was individually blessed, with the medicine men using eagle feathers to direct the sacred smoke around our bodies while speaking prayers that were both protective and cleansing. The sensation was difficult to describe, a feeling of heaviness being lifted, as if invisible threads that had been binding us to something malevolent were being severed one by one. Gary produced a collection of crystals and stones from his pouch, arranging them in specific patterns around Martha's property. He explained that these would create barriers that malevolent spirits would find difficult to cross, providing ongoing protection even after the blessing ritual was complete. The most intensive part of the ceremony involved the preparation of special protective items for each of us to carry. Small leather pouches were filled with a mixture of blessed herbs, ash from sacred fires, and other materials whose names were not shared with those outside the traditional knowledge system. Robert and Gary worked together to charge these items with protective energy, holding each pouch while chanting specific prayers and breathing sacred smoke over them. The process took nearly an hour, with both men maintaining their focus and intensity throughout the entire procedure. When the blessing was complete, both medicine men spoke to us about the precautions we would need to take in the coming days and weeks. We were instructed to carry the protective pouches at all times, to avoid speaking about our experiences with the creature to anyone outside the immediate family, and to continue the daily smudging and prayer routines they had taught us. "The creature will test these protections," Gary warned. "It may return once or twice more, but each time it will find it more difficult to affect you. Eventually, it will seek easier prey and leave you alone." The psychological impact of the blessing ritual was immediate and profound. For the first time in days, the constant weight of dread that had been pressing down on all of us began to lift. The house itself felt different, lighter, somehow more secure, as if invisible walls had been erected around us. That evening passed without incident. We remained vigilant, maintaining our defensive positions and keeping watch throughout the night. But the familiar sounds of our tormentor's presence never materialized. The silence felt different than it had on previous nights, peaceful rather than ominous, restful rather than threatening. Even more encouraging was the change in the family's behavior and demeanor. Conversations resumed their normal flow, laughter returned to our interactions, and the constant tension that had marked every moment for the past. Several days gradually began to ease. Gary and Robert returned the following morning to check on the effectiveness of their work and to perform additional blessings on Vincent and Patricia's trailer before we returned there. They reported that the spiritual energy around all of us had changed dramatically, and that the creature's hold over our family had been significantly weakened. 2 weeks have passed since that final blessing ritual, and our lives have slowly returned to something resembling normalcy. The protective items Gary and Robert prepared for us remain constantly in our possession, and we continue the daily smudging and prayer routines they taught us. But the overwhelming sense of being hunted has finally begun to fade. We returned to Vincent and Patricia's trailer after the medicine men blessed the property, and while the first few nights were tense, no signs of the creature's presence have materialized. The scratches on the wooden steps have been sanded away and painted over, and Patricia has replaced the plants that were disturbed during those terrifying first encounters. But complete peace of mind remains elusive. Every unexpected sound in the night still triggers a moment of panic. Every shadow glimpsed in peripheral vision causes a spike of adrenaline. The experience has left marks on each of us that will likely never completely fade. James has returned to his job at the power plant, but he calls Vincent and Patricia every evening to check on them. And he's installed motion sensor lights around their property. Rita has moved her daughter to stay with relatives in Albuquerque temporarily, unwilling to risk a return of the creature to the Farmington area where her earlier experiences had taken place. The physical evidence of our encounters has largely been erased or repaired, but the psychological impact lingers in ways both subtle and profound. Family gatherings now include routine smudging ceremonies, and conversations about traditional beliefs carry a weight and respect that wasn't always present before. I find myself researching Skinwalker encounters online, reading accounts from other families who have faced similar ordeals. The stories are remarkably consistent in their details. The orange glowing eyes, the wrong proportions, the mixture of animal and human characteristics, the psychological warfare designed to break down the victim's defenses through sustained terror. What strikes me most in these accounts is how the experiences change people permanently. Even those who successfully drive off their tormentors carry the knowledge that certain kinds of evil exist in the world, that the boundaries between the natural and supernatural are far more porous than most people believe. The medicine men warned us that speaking too openly about our experiences could potentially draw unwanted attention again, so I've been careful about who I share this story with and how much detail I provide. But the need to document what happened, to create a record that might help others who face similar situations, feels important enough to justify the risk. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, when the desert is at its quietest, I still find myself listening for familiar sounds, the scratching against exterior walls, the low growling, the disturbing vocalizations that haunted our nights for nearly a week. The absence of these sounds brings relief, but also a persistent awareness that they could return at any time. The protective items we carry have become as routine as car keys or wallets, but their presence serves as a constant reminder of how close we came to something that defied rational explanation. The fact that traditional protective methods proved effective when modern security measures would have been useless has fundamentally altered my understanding of how the world actually works. My grandmother Patricia rarely speaks about those terrifying days, but occasionally I catch her glancing out windows with an alertness that wasn't there before our encounters. Vincent has returned to his normal routines, but he still keeps the gun loaded with ash-coated bullets in easy reach, and he checks the locks on doors and windows every night before bed. The experience has strengthened our family bonds in unexpected ways. Having faced something genuinely threatening together, having relied on each other for protection and support during those dark hours, has created connections that transcend normal family relationships. We are bound now by shared knowledge of forces that most people never encounter and hopefully never will. I Still can't drive past that grocery store where we saw the creature stalking us in broad daylight without feeling a chill of recognition and residual fear. The fact that it was willing to appear so openly in such a public setting continues to disturb me more than any of the nighttime encounters around the trailer. The desert landscape that had always seemed peaceful and welcoming now carries different associations. Every stand of brush could conceal a threat. Every shadow could hide something malevolent. Every unusual sound could signal the return of our tormentor. This hypervigilance may fade with time, but for now, it remains a constant companion. What haunts me most is not the memory of the creature itself, but the knowledge that it's still out there somewhere, perhaps stalking another family, perhaps lying dormant until some future trigger awakens its interest. The medicine men's protections freed us from its immediate attention, but they didn't destroy it or send it back to whatever realm it came from. The prayers continue, the protective items remain close at hand, and the family stays connected through regular phone calls and visits that serve multiple purposes, maintaining relationships, checking on each other's safety, and providing mutual support for the ongoing process of healing from trauma that few outsiders would understand or believe. I wake up each morning grateful for the peaceful night that preceded it, but also aware that this peace came at a cost and must be actively maintained through continued vigilance and respect for forces that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary human experience. The Skinwalker may be gone, but the knowledge of what exists in the darkness remains forever.